There's a city in northern Alabama known as Rocket City, where 250,000 people live in the shadow of an army installation that helped put a man on the moon. On paper, Huntsville is 38,000 acres of laboratories, test ranges, and classified programs. The Army's Aviation and Missile Command, the Missile Defense Agency, the FBI's fastest-growing campus outside of Quantico, Marshall Space Flight Center, where the ground team talks to the International Space Station around the clock every day of the year. It is one of the most concentrated collections of engineers, physicists, and classified aerospace work anywhere in the country. It is also increasingly a place where the people doing that work are ending up dead. Joshua LeBlanc, James Moffett, Amy Esgridge, 3 deaths, 3 people whose work sat at the intersection of aerospace, defense, and something else. Something the United States government has been quietly studying, quietly killing funding for, and quietly starting up again for the last 70 years. The kind of research that, if it ever actually worked, would reshape the balance of power, not just in this country, but on Earth. It would change everything. These are not 3 separate cases. These seem to be one story, and Huntsville, Alabama is at the center of it. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. Now before we get into this one, I want to talk to you for a second, just me and you. The stuff we're about to get into, the stuff we've talked about in the past 2 videos concerning this specific subject, it can get heavy, dare I say, even kind of scary. I know that. And I know that if you've been here with me from the beginning, we've covered a lot of ground. The possibility of extraterrestrial life, the soft disclosure the government seems to be inching towards, the meteor activity that nobody seems to want to talk about, the big one that was, for a while, on a collision course with Earth, doomsday bunkers, military installations, going back to the moon, populating Mars. At first glance, I know a lot of it might feel scattered, like 1,000 pieces of something, all floating in the same room, and the connecting lines between them are hard to see. Trust me, I feel that too. This whole series has been as much of a journey of discovery for me as it has been for you guys. I'm not sitting here with a finished puzzle. I hope you don't think I'm pretending to. I'm trying to put it together in real time right alongside you, but I'll tell you what I do believe. I believe that what we're going to talk about today is going to start pulling some of those floating pieces closer together. I think the lines are going to get a little easier to see. I don't think we're going to have the full picture by the end of this video. Definitely not. I don't know if we ever fully will, but I think today a lot of this is going to start making more sense than it has up to now. And before we go any further, I need to say something else. Thank you, and I mean it. Because of you, I get to spend my days doing this, reading, researching, learning, following threads down rabbit holes, finding the overlaps, connecting the dots. My ADHD brain runs on information and pattern recognition. It's literally what lights me up. It's what creates dopamine in my brain. And every single one of you watching, commenting, sharing, sticking around, you are the reason I get to do what I love and what lights me up. And that is not a small thing. That is everything to me. So thank you, truly. I am beyond proud of all of you for approaching this with an open mind. And for those of you who are still skeptical, and I know that you are. There's some of you who really are pushing back against this, but I want you to know I understand why. Fear sometimes keeps you safe, but in my opinion, it also can shut you down. Fear of the unknown, fear of everything you've ever learned or been told being put under a microscope and called into question. I understand that sometimes when something feels dangerous to the foundation you've built your life on, it can be viewed as a threat, and your first impulse is to reject it, mock it, avoid it, become angry. And as I was going through putting this video in particular together, I felt that too at times, an aversion to what I was reading and what I was seeing coming into focus. A realization that at times I'd been holding my breath for longer than I should have been. At some points, I felt an impulse to just stand up from my desk and walk away from my computer. I felt the anger, the aversion. I felt that feeling inside of your stomach where you're like, wait, I don't like this. So I understand. But if you're still here, stick with me, because we're almost to a place where even a skeptic will have to admit that something is not right. We have a lot to talk about today. It's going to be a long video, but before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Whatnot. You guys know that when I get into something, I don't just casually browse. I investigate, I research, I fall down the rabbit hole, I hyperfixate. And apparently that applies not only to true crime, but also to shopping for collectibles, vintage pieces, books, decor, random nostalgic treasures, basically anything that makes me say, wait, I need to know more about this. I'm obsessed with this now, which is why I'm really excited to tell you about today's partner, Whatnot. Whatnot is the #1 live streaming shopping app, and it's kind of like live shopping, social media, and real-time deals all happening at once. There are over 100 categories on the app, so whether you're into collectibles, trading cards, vintage clothing, music, like records and stuff, sneakers, beauty, home decor, books, toys, or just into finding something unique that you didn't even know you needed, there's genuinely something for everyone. And the fun part is that you're not just scrolling through listings alone. You can hop into a live show chat with the seller, ask questions, see the item in real time, and purchase right there while everything is happening. Okay, so I'm going to hop into the Whatnot app, and I'm actually on the lookout, as you can see, for Neatos and dumplings, because my kids are obsessed with them right now. Everyone's obsessed with them, it seems, because you cannot find them anywhere, and they've had me going back and forth around stores looking for them for weeks, actually months. It was before Easter that I've started this. So let's see if Whatnot delivers. Let's go first to the Neatos. So this one says I can win the bid and pick my prize. So I bid. It says I'm winning. I think, one second. I won. That's amazing. That was it? That's so easy, right? Okay. And now I get to pick my prize. So that's awesome. And I love this because it's very like gamified. It feels very much like the thrill of hunting for the perfect little treasure, except I don't have to leave my house or put on real pants or pretend like I have self-control in public. Okay, so in the live show, you could really see how easy it was. You can watch what the seller's showing. You can chat with them or the community. And when something catches your eye, you can swipe to make your purchase. I also really like that you're supporting individual sellers and small businesses, which makes it feel more personal than just throwing something into a cart and forgetting about it. And I mean, buying those Neatos was dangerously easy. I definitely understand the appeal. So you can try Whatnot out for yourself. You can use my link in the description box or scan the QR code on screen to get $15 off your first purchase anywhere on the app. And there's also a giveaway. If you sign up for Whatnot using my link and follow me there at stephanieharlowe, H-A-R 91033, you'll automatically be entered to win $500 in Whatnot credit. That could go towards collectibles, vintage finds, gifts, home decor, or whatever rabbit hole you personally decide to fall into. So check out Whatnot, use my link or scan the QR code to get your $15 credit, and make sure you follow me there to enter the giveaway. Thank you so much to Whatnot for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get back into it. Today, I'm going to do something a little different than I have in the past videos. I'm going to introduce the 3 people we are talking about right from the start. I'm going to tell you how they all died and the circumstances around their deaths, and then we're going to probe deeper into their backgrounds and area of expertise, and then we're going to do the real work of how it all seems to blend together. On July 22nd, 2025, the body of 29-year-old Joshua LeBlanc was pulled from the burnt wreckage of his 2021 Model 3 Tesla in Florence, Alabama. The car was found burned beyond recognition. The body inside was also burnt beyond recognition, and LeBlanc's identity was confirmed 3 days later after his body was transported to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. Officials say that the vehicle struck a guardrail and several trees before bursting into flames. Joshua's family reported him missing earlier that day when he failed to show up at his job at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, where he worked on nuclear propulsion projects. Not showing up to work was out of character for Joshua, and not being in contact with his loved ones was also out of character for him. According to his obituary, Joshua was born and raised in New Iberia, Louisiana, and stargazing through his telescope was a favorite pastime. Joshua loved anything related to the stars and space, which led him to a career with NASA, first in New Orleans and eventually 5.5 years before he died, in Huntsville, Alabama. Even though he was geographically separated from his friends and family, he kept them close with, quote, nearly daily presence in online communities consisting of friends and family where they would spend the evenings either gaming deep in conversation or sharing comfortable silence, end quote. Police tracked Joshua down to where his car was found 2 hours away from his Huntsville home using data from his Tesla Sentry mode. And they also discovered that the vehicle had sat at the Huntsville airport 12 minutes from Joshua's home for 4 hours on the morning of his death before it had headed west along rural backroads. Joshua's family said that this series of events was not part of his plans for that day, and it was very suspicious because he had left his home earlier that morning, leaving his phone, wallet, and keys behind, as well as his dog. Now, this led Joshua's family to fear that he had been abducted from his home before being killed. So we have a very similar situation here to General McCasland, to Melissa Cassius, someone leaving their home without bringing their phone, without bringing their wallet. And in this case, because the family's not connected to a government agency like NASA or Los Alamos National Lab, the family is saying, we find this to be suspicious, whereas Mark Cassius and General McCasland's wife were like, hey, there's nothing to see here. Joshua's family is saying, we find this to be suspicious. This is not like Joshua. There is something to see here. A news report from July of 2025 states, quote, the family is urging Tesla to release video from the car's Sentry mode system, which may have captured crucial footage. So far, however, they say progress has been slow due to delays between the company and law enforcement agencies, end quote. So it's been almost a year since then, and I wonder if Joshua's family has been able to obtain this video or if things are still slow because of delays between Tesla and law enforcement. So Sentry mode footage in a Tesla is stored locally on a USB drive in the glove box, but we have been told already that Joshua's car was burned beyond recognition, which means that physical USB drive was probably destroyed or melted and inaccessible. Now, in that case, police most likely got the vehicle's location history from a cloud-based system, but because video files are large, they are not continuously uploaded to that cloud-based system for privacy and bandwidth reasons. So if the USB drive in Joshua's Tesla was burned, police can request further data directly from Tesla, and according to the internet, Tesla typically fulfills data privacy requests within 7 to 30 days, which is a pretty big window. Now, for major accidents, like those involving airbag deployment, which I would think this would fall under that, Tesla vehicles often automatically upload collision snapshots, including video and telemetry, and these get uploaded to Tesla's servers within seconds of the impact. So what I'm saying is that Tesla should have something, right? Something, more information about what happened in that car when Joshua LeBlanc left his home without bringing his wallet or his cell phone, and then he went to the airport by his home for 4 hours, and then randomly drove 2 hours west before once again randomly crashing into a guardrail for some unknown reason. Now, if Tesla has not shared that information with the family or with law enforcement, I would be curious to know why. If they claim they don't have that information, I would be curious to know why, because they should. On Friday, April 17th, 2026, so I believe I'm recording this on April 29th, this is just a few weeks ago, 61-year-old James Moffett, His wife Lessa and their two sons, 30-year-old Andrew and 28-year-old William, were killed when their plane crashed in a wooded area at Union County Airport in South Carolina. The family was from Huntsville, Alabama. They were traveling to Georgia, but they were stopping in Union County to refuel. The plane they were flying in was a Mooney M-20 single-engine aircraft, and the Union County Sheriff's Office said the crash occurred at around 6:30 p.m. Authorities have not released a cause of the crash yet, as the NTSB and Federal Aviation Administration investigate the accident. I'm going to tell you a little later how unlikely, statistically, this plane crash would be, given a lot of elements. Now, genuinely, this is just absolutely tragic because the Moffetts seemed like such a nice family. Looking through the accounts of people who knew them, they were really just good people, a close family, loved by their friends and their community. James Moffett was a 21-year Army veteran who was retired, but before retirement, he was an aerospace engineer who worked at NASA's Johnson Space Center and then founded an aerospace consulting firm before working as a principal research engineer at the University of Alabama Huntsville Research Center. His wife, Lessa, was a first and second grade learning coach at Valley Leadership Academy, a hybrid nonprofit school in Huntsville. Their oldest son, Andrew, was an up-and-coming research engineer and scientist at the University of Alabama Huntsville's Research and Engineering Support Center, and their youngest son, Andrew, worked in the information technology industry. Both William and Andrew served as counselors at Space Camp at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and they were credited by the center for the important role they played in inspiring the next generation of explorers. So Space Camp in Huntsville does a lot of things, but a lot of what they do is like work with kids and even adults who want to learn more about space, and they have space camps and stuff there. According to the NTSB, the Moffett's plane was on its way to Gilmer, Georgia from Raleigh, North Carolina. They stopped to refuel at the Union County Airport in South Carolina, but after takeoff, the plane reportedly hit a heavily wooded area only about 1,200 feet from the runway. Fire consumed most of the wreckage, and all 4 passengers died. James and Lessa Moffett also had 3 other children who are left behind, and it breaks my heart to think about how they must be feeling right now. It looks like they had 2 daughters and another son. On June 11th, 2022, 34-year-old Amy Esgridge was found dead in Huntsville, Alabama from a single gunshot wound to the head. The Madison County coroner officially ruled her death a suicide, and local police closed the case without further investigation. Now, her obituary says that Amy graduated from the University of Huntsville with a double major in chemistry and biology. She then became an interdisciplinarian and a master of electrical engineering, chemistry, physics, and genetic engineering. Amy co-founded the Institute of Exotic Science along with her father, Richard Esgridge, who had worked for NASA, and as we'll find, Richard Esgridge didn't just work for NASA, he was pretty high up over there. The Institute of Exotic Science was a public benefiting corporation specializing in quantum computing, gravity modification, and metamaterial science and communications. A presentation put together by Amy for the Institute of Exotic Science talks about the work and research she was doing on advanced propulsion and anti-gravity technology. It also refers to another scientist, Dr. Ning Li, a physicist who worked as a research scientist at the Center for Space Plasma and Aeronomic Research at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where she and fellow physicist Douglas Torr published a series of papers that claimed there was a practical way to produce anti-gravity effects. Dr. Lee's work attracted the attention and funding of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in the 1990s, but in 1999, she left the University of Alabama to start her own company, AC Gravity LLC, which was awarded a U.S. Department of Defense grant for almost $500,000 in 2001, and this was a grant to continue her anti-gravity research. The results from that grant were never published. FOIA requests that have been filed for the results have been consistently and repeatedly denied. Now, the weird thing is no one can really agree on what happened next. Dr. Lee gave her last known public presentation at a science convention in 2003, and kind of around May of 2003, Dr. Lee seemed to just vanish, like dropped off the face of the earth. In 2004, a journalist named Tim Ventura contacted a man named Eugene Podklanov, a physicist and one of Dr. Lee's peers, and Ventura told Eugene that he'd been trying to reach Dr. Lee through her email, and he said someone was reading the emails, but he wasn't getting any responses. Dr. Podklanov assured Ventura that Dr. Lee was fine. She was still working at the DoD, the Department of Defense, but she wasn't able to discuss her work. But Dr. Podklanov also admitted that he no longer had a working phone number or email address for Dr. Ning Lee. In July of 2008, a physicist named Jack Sarfati made a claim in an interview.
One of the key scientists in this electrogravitic superconductivity sort of stuff is a Chinese woman named Ning Lee. And she has disappeared, allegedly going back to China. And our intelligence agencies do have very good
Wasn't she
information.
working at NASA?
She was working at NASA, Redstone Arsenal, and but she disappeared for several years. The people at the Pentagon who were in touch with her cannot reach her anymore. She is allegedly back in China, and the Chinese, Red Chinese, are putting a lot of money into these exotic projects.
That's a crazy claim to make, right? And then after this, everyone kind of ran with it, and they were like, this scientist who was working on anti-gravity and who had claimed she'd found a way to modify gravity, affect gravity, not make zero gravity, but to find a way to make a change in gravity. She's completely missing. Now, eventually, in 2023, Noah Logan with the Huntsville Business Journal tracked down Dr. Ning Lee's son, George. And George basically said, we have no idea that everyone's been looking for my mom. We didn't know all this stuff was going on. George said that his mother had never left the Department of Defense. She had never gone back to China, although she had been visited by members of the CCP in 2008 who were trying to get her to go back to China, but she'd said no. In fact, George said that with her work with the government, Dr. Ning Lee wasn't allowed to go back to China, even if she wanted to visit family. Like, she had tried at one point to go back and visit her mother, but the government, NASA, the Department of Defense, they were like, no, because of what you're working on, we can't have you going to China. Now, George said that he had noticed a change in his mother after she left the university for the private sector. Because remember, she was doing her research at the University of Alabama, and through the university, she caught the attention of NASA and they were interested in her work. And then she left and started her own business, and she had a grant from the government to do her research and continue her research. And then she started working for the Department of Defense. And George said, quote, when she was at the university, she loved to publish her findings. But after she got her top secret clearance, she wasn't allowed to share anything anymore with anyone. She became much quieter. She would return from work looking worn down with her makeup messed up. It wasn't like that when she was at the university, end quote. Because understand, when Dr. Ning Lee was working as a private scientist or working for the university, so you're going to want to publish your findings and have them peer-reviewed and things. When you start working for the Department of Defense, you are not allowed to publish your findings. They are private government property. George also revealed, sadly, that in 2014, his mother, Dr. Ning Lee, was struck by a vehicle while crossing the street on the University of Alabama campus in Huntsville. She was left with permanent brain damage, which led to an Alzheimer's diagnosis shortly afterwards. She was never the same. She was never mentally, very with it and tight again, and she never returned to work. Also, apparently, Dr. Lee's husband of 46 years, he had witnessed his wife be hit by the car. He immediately had a heart attack, and then he never recovered either, and he died a year later. So George cared for his mother for the next 6 years until she died on July 27th, 2021. Now, it kind of feels like we're supposed to find this whole situation less suspicious, that Dr. Lee was randomly hit by a car on the campus of a university she no longer worked for, which led to the end of her career, the end of her work, and her eventual death. I would have found it less suspicious if she'd defected to China, honestly. And also, it's important to note that neither the University of Alabama or NASA, who she did research for and did work for decades in the 90s and into the 2000s, they never published a memorial. They never published a public remembrance of her. And you might be asking why I find it suspicious at all. And we will talk about that later when we discuss the deeper implications of Dr. Lee's work. For now, back to Amy Esgridge, who apparently took her own life at the age of 34, and the police left it at that, reportedly without ever even conducting a toxicology screen. No reports that Amy was struggling with her mental health. No reports that she had talked to people close to her about wanting to end it all. In fact, it was the opposite. On May 13th, 2022, just weeks before her alleged suicide, Amy texted a close friend, quote, "If you see any report that I killed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I overdosed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I killed anyone else, I most definitely did not." End quote. Now, this message was sent to Amy's friend, Frank Milburn, who actually was a former British intelligence officer, and Amy said a lot of other things in messages, but we'll get there. So here is Amy in a 2020 YouTube interview.
So my dad was the technical lead of the Advanced Propulsion Lab at NASA Marshall. Again, the propulsion capital of the world. So I was a little autistic girl, and I was listening to my dad moan and complain about NASA being inefficient and about how we could do anti-gravity if they fucking funded us for my entire life. My brain is wired from birth, my entire development. My brain developed under the conditions of listening to the technical lead of the Advanced Propulsion Lab of NASA Marshall, the propulsion capital of the world, complain about how no one was funding him and he had great ideas. They have all these geniuses that are constantly trying to be like, damn, I've worked at NASA for 40 years and nothing I've ever done in my entire career has been deployed. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I need to try harder on the next one, or my career is a failure and I've wasted my entire career of being a genius. Guess what? All of those ideas got applied and optimized for the secret space program, motherfucker. You never saw the success. You never got the satisfaction. You never got the pat on the back. You never got the dopamine. And it means that you work harder on the next problem to prove yourself so your career isn't a waste after 30, 40 years. That's what they do in Huntsville, Alabama. They psychologically abuse you into solving problems forever. Idea factory. They withhold the satisfaction because it makes you solve the next problem better if you withhold the satisfaction. And what I learned, my first job was at 15 at the Weapons Sciences Directorate for AMRDEC. I did not apply for that job. I did a science fair project in piezoelectrics, and I got a call from the Army, and they offered me a job at 15. I couldn't even drive. My brother had to drive me into the arsenal because they offered the job to both of us, me and my older brother who could drive. And we carpooled every day for the summer.
Amy Esgridge had said that she intended to present new foundational research on anti-gravity, but she required authorization from NASA before doing so. She also said she had co-founded the Institute of Exotic Science as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology because, quote, "If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off," end quote. Which is kind of scary, but true. What Amy is saying is, hey, if you're doing something that puts your life in danger or that people in power don't want to get out or don't want you to publicly talk about, if you become a public-facing figure, then at least if something happens to you, people notice and they say something and they raise questions about it. Now, we're going to come back to Amy Esgridge. Trust me. But before we go back to these three people, four if you count Dr. Ning Lee, let's talk about Huntsville, Alabama, the place that connects them all. Huntsville, Alabama is called Rocket City because it became one of the most important places in the United States for rocket development, missile research, and the space program, especially during the Cold War and the Apollo era. Before that, Huntsville was a much smaller southern city, known more for cotton, railroads, and industry. That changed after World War II, when the United States brought German rocket scientists and Nazis, including Wernher von Braun, to America through Operation Paperclip. So once again, understand Wernher von Braun was an active Nazi, active, very much involved in the Nazi activities. This was not a guy who was like, it was just on the periphery. No, he was in it, okay? So von Braun and his team had first worked for the United States Army in Texas and New Mexico, but in 1949, the Army approved moving the group to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, and that move essentially transformed Huntsville into a rocket development hub. At Redstone Arsenal, the Nazi and his team, they worked on military rockets and missiles, including the Redstone rocket, which later became historically important because a modified Redstone launched Alan Shepard, the first American in space, in 1961. Wernher von Braun became a U.S. citizen in 1951, 10 years before that, and later he became the first director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, which once again connects all of the people we're talking about today. Huntsville's identity then became tied to this new emerging aerospace world: engineering, propulsion, defense, and eventually human spaceflight. And the biggest reason the nickname stuck is because of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, which opened in Huntsville in 1960. Marshall became the NASA center responsible for major launch vehicle development. When President John F. Kennedy became committed to landing a man on the moon, NASA turned to Marshall to develop the giant rocket that could actually do that. That rocket was the Saturn V. The Saturn V was a massive rocket used by the Apollo program to send astronauts to the moon, and that was developed at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. Now, Huntsville was genuinely one of the places where the American space program was engineered. The rockets that made Apollo possible were designed, developed, tested, and managed through the institutions based there. The University of Alabama grew up alongside Huntsville's transformation into a military, aerospace, and space research city. And its own history says the University of Alabama Huntsville Center began offering classes in 1950, right around the same moment von Braun's rocket team was arriving at Redstone Arsenal. So it's not as if the school came later as an unrelated educational institution. It developed in the same environment that was turning Huntsville into Rocket City. The practical importance is this: University of Alabama Huntsville became part of the talent pipeline. Huntsville needed engineers, physicists, computer scientists, atmospheric scientists, systems people, defense researchers, propulsion experts, and technical managers. And the University of Alabama at Huntsville helped train and keep that workforce plentiful and local. UAH also has a direct research connection to the Rocket City ecosystem, and it works with agencies including NASA, Department of Defense, NSF, NOAA, Department of Energy, and NIH, the National Institute of Health. And that matters because Huntsville, Alabama's rocket identity is not just about old Apollo history or the Saturn V or the Redstone rocket. It's also about ongoing research and defense space work. Another big piece is Cummings Research Park, where the University of Alabama Huntsville is described as an anchor tenant. Cummings Research Park is one of the largest research parks in the country, with hundreds of technology companies and organizations. And that park sits right in the middle of Huntsville's modern identity: aerospace, defense, engineering, software, cybersecurity, advanced manufacturing, and space-related research. The nickname Rocket City is still relevant today. Huntsville didn't just build the Saturn V and then become a historical footnote. It built an ecosystem: military, NASA, private contractors, educational training grounds, research parks. It worked on Artemis. It works on the International Space System. And all of this kept aerospace at the center of the city's economy and culture. So here is Amy Esgridge again.
People don't know what Huntsville is. Huntsville is the biggest fucking deal on the planet that you have never heard of. Now, Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology. and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology. Huntsville is like the hub. Like, we are number 3 on the first strike launch list. If first strike happens, 3 targets, Huntsville will be one of them. Alabama. This is Alabama, dude, in the deep south. We're in the top 3 first strike. We're in the top 3 first strike because you haven't heard of us. That's why. It's on purpose. I started the Institute for one reason. One reason, the Institute. I started it as a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology through, because I told Mark this. If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, fuck you. They will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news. That's why the Institute exists. So it's a platform of credibility and public-facing persona. So, like, sorry, my laptop's falling. So I need to establish that like at least 3 months ahead of time, which is basically now, to be real. 3 months ahead of time is basically today.
Now listen, before we go on, I'm going to state the obvious because I know people are going to be saying it. Amy seems drunk, okay? Amy's on a 3-hour live. It actually might have been 4 hours. She has clearly been drinking, and people kind of use that demeanor to discredit what she's saying. And there have been people who have come out, including Russ Coulthart, who were like, hey, I don't think Amy Esgridge took her own life. She didn't seem to have any issues that would lead to that. Yes, did she like to drink alcohol? Yeah. But I would also say a lot of people who are kind of in a constant place where their mind's always running, where they're always like coming up with things, where they can't kind of zone in and focus in on one thing, they will often turn to substances like alcohol or marijuana, especially when they're like off for the day and they're just chilling and talking with someone on a live to sort of quiet that noise. That is a pretty known thing. And I also want to say that somebody who maybe uses alcohol, even in excess, it does not discredit what they're saying or discredit their intelligence if they are intelligent. So I also want to talk about anti-gravity and what that means, because when people hear that word or term, they immediately get weird. They stop listening to anything said afterwards. They're like, oh, that's science fiction. That's not real. We can't do that. When you hear that people are undertaking anti-gravity research, the first place our minds go to is, like I said, science fiction. We think flying cars, the Jetsons, alien spaceships, etc. Anti-gravity research isn't really about that. It's about finding a way to modify or manipulate gravity, even slightly, for real-world implications. It is the search for ways to modify, reduce, shield, or counteract gravity itself. And the United States, along with governments all around the world, have been legitimately studying this for decades, and they still are. And we're going to go deeper into that a bit later. But I want you to understand, when I talk about anti-gravity, this is not like, oh, this is fringe or this is something that only conspiracy theorists talk about. No, it's real research. Dr. Ning Li was doing anti-gravity research. So was Dr. Podklanov, who I had to write down his name so I could remember how to pronounce it, Eugene Podklanov. They were doing legitimate research on gravity that was being funded by, the government. I mean, at least Dr. Ning Li was. She had a Department of Defense contract. And I want to focus on a benefit of being able to manipulate gravity. There's a lot of benefits, right? But the most exciting benefit in the eyes of NASA and the government, and that is propulsion, right? Which we are talking about all the time in these videos as far as what these scientists and researchers were looking into and working on. Propulsion, in the sense of getting away from the current way we send rockets into space, to be able to make them lighter so they can go further and cost less, because a lot of what weighs down our rockets now is fuel, right? So if you didn't have to use fuel to send a rocket into space, it would take so much less money to send a rocket into space, and it could go so much further, and it would be so much faster. Joshua LeBlanc, the first person we talked about, the young man who was found dead burned beyond recognition in his Tesla, allegedly, if that was him. He had been working for NASA as an aerospace technologies electrical engineer in Marshall Space Flight Center, where he worked on nuclear propulsion projects. So he was working on propulsion projects. He worked on NASA's Space Nuclear Propulsion Instrumentation and Control Maturation Program. That's a mouthful, but what it actually means is he was working on the sensors, control systems, and electronics that let humans operate a nuclear reactor in space safely and reliably, which ties back to what we talked about in the last episode when we talked about Melissa Cassius, Los Alamos National Lab, how the government is trying to apparently get us to Mars, but they need to use the moon as a stepping stone, so they want to put nuclear reactors in space and on the moon. So you can't run a fission reactor on a spacecraft without an enormously sophisticated control system. Every parameter has to be monitored, every variable controlled, every fault detected before it becomes a catastrophe. And Joshua's specialty was that nervous system. He was also a team lead on something called Draco, not Malfoy. Draco's an acronym. It stands for something much longer, Demonstration Rocket for Agile Cislunar Operations, which once again is a mouthful, but Draco is a joint NASA-DARPA program to build and fly an actual operational nuclear thermal rocket engine in space. Not a study, not a paper, a flight demonstrator. The first time the United States will have flown a nuclear rocket in over 50 years. It was originally targeted for a 2027 demonstration with serious DARPA funding behind it. This is one of the most strategically important advanced propulsion programs the U.S. government is currently running. And DARPA stands for Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They are a branch of the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and they were established in 1958 to develop breakthrough, high-risk technologies for national security. Any project that is DARPA-related is routinely top secret with SAP overlays, special access programs, like we discussed when we talked about General McCaslin. SAP programs are, very, very secret, often kind of in conjunction with Black Ops. And Joshua LeBlanc's clearance, his security clearance, would have been top secret at its baseline, with an additional Q clearance needed for the project's nuclear components, as well as additional clearance for the DARPA elements. So that would put Joshua LeBlanc in a fairly small population of cleared professionals at that level. A clearance at this level is not just a piece of paper either. It's not just like, you're cleared, have fun, have at it. It comes with continuous monitoring, periodic reinvestigation, polygraph requirements depending on the agency, restrictions on foreign travel, like we were talking about with Dr. Ning Li when the government wouldn't let her go to China, restrictions on contact with foreign nationals, mandatory reporting of significant life events like financial issues, foreign relationships, drug use, mental health issues, etc., and a permanent legal obligation to protect classified information for the rest of your life. Okay, so people with these clearances cannot freely talk about their work. They can describe their job at a high level. They can say, I work on space nuclear propulsion at Marshall, but they can't discuss the specifics of reactor designs, operational parameters, performance data, intelligence assessments, program timelines, etc. They cannot do that outside of cleared spaces with other appropriately cleared individuals. So it's very restricted. They also have a designated security office at their workplace. They undergo regular security briefings, and if they ever experience anything unusual, like being approached by a suspicious individual or receiving unexpected attention from unknown parties, or if they notice they're being followed, they are required to report it. And this is taken very seriously. Cleared personnel, like Joshua LeBlanc, are explicitly trained on counterintelligence threats, as far as what he was working on and how it connects to the two other people we're talking about today, as well as all the other stuff we've been talking about in the series. I will tie that all together soon. But I first wanted you to understand that Joshua LeBlanc, with his level of clearance, with his DARPA entanglements and his NASA entanglements and what he was working on and the kind of information he would have, this would be somebody who would be constantly monitored for mental health issues or anything weird that would be going on. And the day Joshua LeBlanc apparently died in a fiery car crash, He didn't go to work, which was unusual. He left his phone and wallet at home, which was unusual. He didn't make arrangements for his pet, who apparently he loved very much, right? Like we all do, which was unusual. And then he drove to the airport where his car sat for several hours, 4 hours. He then took an unplanned trip 2 hours away from his home and randomly crashed into a guardrail. Joshua's family says that none of this lines up with the person they know, and they are concerned foul play was involved. I too am concerned, and I don't think that Joshua LeBlanc was responsible for crashing his own car. And in fact, was Joshua LeBlanc even in that car? Because his body was burned beyond recognition, and they brought him somewhere and they confirmed his identity. But once again, that's a government agency. Is it possible his car was parked at the airport for 4 hours because he maybe took a flight, or he was meeting a private plane or a helicopter or something like that? Or is it possible that he felt he was being followed and he was trying to convince somebody he was taking a flight, but then he drove away from the airport trying to outrun someone or evade someone, and then the car crashed? So once again, I don't think Joshua's car crashed because he was being pursued necessarily. I don't know exactly what happened, but I think that the car was hijacked, in my opinion. So stay with me, because I know everybody's going to start being crazy and being like, you're out of your mind. This couldn't happen. Yes, it could, and it's been proven. So a modern Tesla has all the ingredients that would make remote hijacking possible. An always-on cellular modem, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, a central compute platform that talks to the steering, braking, and throttle systems over internal networks, and over-the-air update capability. So security researchers have repeatedly demonstrated that a hijacking is real and possible. The 2016 and 2017 Keen Security Lab exploits remotely manipulated braking and steering assist on a Model S from miles away. The 2023 Berlin research got root access. So that means basically jailbreaking, gaining admin control over the car's underlying Linux operating system. So if academic researchers working with limited budgets can do this, it's reasonable to assume that a well-resourced state actor, a government person with access to zero-day vulnerabilities, and zero-day vulnerabilities is a security flaw that's unknown to the company and that attackers and hackers can exploit before a fix exists. So the government, once again, we know that the CIA is aware of these zero-day vulnerabilities in companies that the companies themselves are not aware of, and I'm going to show you that soon and prove that to you. So a person who is a government actor who has access to high technology, is aware of zero-day vulnerabilities, has, intelligence capabilities and potentially insider cooperation. Could they not do more than just a team of, researchers, scientists, and hackers who are trying to prove that Teslas and other vehicles can be hacked? A lot more, in fact. And thanks to our friends at WikiLeaks, we know this. We know that agencies like the NSA, CIA, and their counterparts in other countries have documented histories of developing exploits for connected devices, and specifically in this situation, for vehicles. And that's going to introduce us to the Vault 7 leaks in 2017, which revealed that the CIA had explored vehicle hacking with a note in internal documents specifically mentioning that such capabilities could enable, quote, nearly undetectable assassinations, end quote. That's not speculation. I'm not making it up. That's from the CIA's own leaked files. These internal files that we were never meant to see, of course. So WikiLeaks published those documents, and the authenticity was not disputed by the agency. In fact, somebody got in trouble for leaking them, but we'll talk about that in a second. Documents and files dated between 2013 and 2016 indicated that the CIA's Embedded Development Branch, the EDB, had explored methods to infect and take control of modern vehicle systems. A meeting in October of 2014 specifically listed vehicle systems and vehicle systems evaluation process as potential mission areas for the agency. And this was included in part of a larger arsenal of tools designed to exploit the Internet of Things, which also included the Weeping Angel program for turning smart TVs into listening devices. Now, those files are where I learned about something that they call fake-off mode. And this is a state where a hacked television appears to be turned off completely, but remains fully powered to record audio. And the CIA files are like, hey, we've really got this technology down for fake-off mode to make these TVs definitely look like they're off when they're definitely still recording people. Okay, 1984. Now let's talk about the man who made all of this information being delivered to us possible. And his name is Joshua Schultz. I mean, it was. I don't know where he's at now. Okay, so Joshua Schultz was a software engineer at the CIA. He worked in the engineering development group, and he was accused of stealing a massive archive of classified cyber tools and documents that he then gave to WikiLeaks. He did so anonymously, but they found him. And this exposed CIA-developed cyber espionage tools and techniques for exploiting smartphones, computers, and smart device to gain access, extract data, and activate microphones and cameras. Like ways that they could spy on people. Not us, of course, not their own citizens, of course, like other people, but not us. Not only were people able to see how advanced government hacking tools had become when these files were released, but it obviously raised concerns about privacy, oversight of intelligence agencies, and whether vulnerabilities in the systems and devices we use every day were actually being disclosed so they could be fixed, or were they being stockpiled by the CIA so they could be used, maybe even against us? And that created tension around 0 days, which we talked about briefly earlier, because it showed that governments sometimes keep these vulnerabilities in companies like Tesla or companies like Apple. They keep those vulnerabilities that could be hacked and exploited a secret, even though they know about them, and they should be telling the company so the company can fix it. But the CIA keeps it a secret so they can use those vulnerabilities to gather intelligence. So Joshua Schultz was later charged and convicted on espionage, computer hacking, contempt, and other offenses. More on those other offenses in a second. And they say that Joshua's motive to release all of this information was due to, quote, disputes with coworkers and management, end quote. He was a disgruntled employee, basically. So he put his whole life and freedom and reputation and career on the line, because he was mad about workplace disputes. Now, during an FBI investigation into Joshua Schultz and the data breach, agents searched his apartment and discovered what they called a digital lockbox on his computer that revealed tens of thousands of images and videos of CSAM, including material he had allegedly collected since 2009. Now, understand this. I don't know, so I can't say for sure. And I'm not saying that this CSAM material wasn't there on Joshua's computers or electronics. I'm not even saying that he might not have put it there, because I don't know. But I am saying we should pause for a moment. We should pause for a moment because this is pretty typical of a whistleblower type situation. Somebody like Joshua Schultz is going to reveal all of this stuff. And, whether he did it because he was a disgruntled worker or because, like someone like Edward Snowden, he was like, people need to know this. But either way, what he releases, he's going to get in trouble for because it's against the law. It's, against what he is supposed to be doing at the CIA. He's going to get in trouble for that. But the American people might push back and they might say, hey, I understand that he broke the law, but we wanted to know this. We should know this. You guys shouldn't be keeping this stuff from us. We should be able to know this. And we appreciate Joshua Schultz for, exposing this and revealing it to us. So we don't really like the fact that he's being kind of thrown in prison for the rest of his life for espionage. But if that same guy who leaked the information that the American people already kind of wanted to know and are probably appreciative that he did leak it, if they can label him the worst thing ever, right? A child predator, the lowest of the low, something that nobody could forgive him for. well, then people aren't really going to like champion for him to not be in trouble. They're not going to look at him like somebody who helped or like a hero. I mean, how could they? Even if he released information that we found valuable and wanted to know, he's still a monster. He's still the lowest of the low. So yeah, like throw him away. Throw him in prison and toss away the key. Make sure he never sees the light of day again. And I'm going to ask you to remember the CIA's long and maybe alleged history of silencing people, silencing and discrediting people, whistleblowers, so that any information they might have either never comes out or is seen through a skeptical lens because the source they came from. I could go through the list of people who are suspected to be CIA targets, but let's talk about one person in particular, a journalist named Michael Hastings, who died in 2013 when his Mercedes crashed at high speed in Los Angeles. Hastings came up in the journalism world in the 2000s, working for Newsweek, where he was based in Baghdad covering the Iraq War. After leaving Newsweek, he wrote for Rolling Stone, BuzzFeed, GQ, and The Hollywood Reporter. His reputation was pretty strong, built on adversarial, uncompromising reporting on the U.S. military, intelligence community, and political establishment. He was not afraid to tell the truth. He was one of those people, I think, where it was like, being honest and telling the truth is not a choice. It's a moral responsibility. He was the kind of journalist who unsettled people in power, and unlike many in his profession, he didn't seem interested in maintaining the access-driven relationships that keep most national security reporters from going too hard, going too public. In June of 2010, Rolling Stone published Michael Hastings' profile of someone named General Stanley McChrystal, the commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. Hastings had spent weeks embedded with McChrystal and his staff in Paris and Afghanistan, and the article quoted McChrystal and his aides openly mocking Vice President Joe Biden, the National Security Advisor, the U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan, and other senior figures in the Obama administration. The fallout was immediate and enormous. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, President Obama recalled McChrystal to Washington and forced his resignation. A 4-star general, the top commander of a war, was ended by a single magazine article. It was one of the most consequential pieces of journalism of the era. It also made Michael Hastings a marked man inside the Pentagon and the broader national security establishment, in my opinion, allegedly. Not really. I mean, my opinion is shared by a lot of people because it seems pretty blatant. Hastings' access was cut off, his reputation among military brass became toxic, and he became, for the rest of his career, the journalist who had taken down a general, someone whose senior officials kept a very close and wary eye on. And in the years between the McChrystal piece and his death, Hastings continued reporting on national security topics with the same aggressive energy. He covered the Bo Bergdahl case, Pentagon spending, the Obama administration's drone program, and the surveillance state that emerged in the post-9/11 period. He was openly critical of the Obama White House on civil liberties issues, and he had a particular focus on what he saw as the erosion of press freedom. In the months before his death, he was reportedly working on a profile of John Brennan, then the director of the CIA. Brennan had been the architect of much of Obama's drone program and was a controversial figure within the intelligence community itself. If you've been paying attention to the news, John Brennan is in there again. Apparently, the Department of Justice is trying to do a probe into some things that he has said and done, but whatever. Hastings was working on a piece about John Brennan before he died. He had also been digging into the surveillance of journalists by the Department of Justice, which had recently been revealed in a scandal involving the seizure of Associated Press phone records. He had reported on the FBI's tracking of journalist James Rosen of Fox News. He was working on a story about Barrett Brown, the journalist and activist who had been arrested in connection with the Stratfor leaks. He was, in short, doing exactly the kind of reporting that someone in his position would have understood carried risk. In the days leading up to June 18th, 2013, Michael Hastings exhibited behavior that those around him later described as alarming and possibly paranoid, though whether his alarm was justified is the central question. He told his neighbor, Jordana Thigpen, that he believed his car was being tampered with and asked to borrow hers. She declined. He sent an email to his colleagues at BuzzFeed and a few close contacts on June 17, 2013, the day before he died, with the subject line, FBI investigation, NSA. The body of the email read, in part, quote, "Hey, redacted, the feds are interviewing my close friends and associates. Perhaps if the authorities arrive, BuzzFeed GQ or HQ may be wise to immediately request legal counsel before any conversations or interviews about our news gathering practices or related journalism issues. Also, I'm onto a big story and need to go off the radar for a bit. All the best and hope to see you all soon. Michael." End quote. This email went to several people, including a BuzzFeed lawyer, Michael Hastings' editor, and notably his friend, Joe Biggs, a former Army soldier who later became a more controversial figure, but at that time was simply Michael Hastings' friend. Biggs would go on to be one of the most outspoken voices arguing that Michael Hastings' death was not an accident. The FBI later denied that Hastings was under investigation. He had also reportedly told friends he believed he was being followed. And in the hours before the crash, he reached out to WikiLeaks lawyer Jennifer Robinson to discuss what he believed was government surveillance of him. WikiLeaks itself confirmed this contact after Michael Hastings' death. At approximately 4:25 a.m. on June 18, 2013, Hastings was driving his 2013 Mercedes-Benz C250 southbound on Highland Avenue in the Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. The car was traveling at extremely high speeds. Estimates range from 80 to over 100 miles per hour on a residential street. The Mercedes struck a palm tree in the median. The impact was catastrophic. Several details of the crash have been the source of ongoing debate. The engine block of the Mercedes was found approximately 200 feet from the wreckage on the opposite side of the street. In a normal high-speed front-end collision, the engine typically remains attached to the vehicle or at least comes to rest near it. For the engine to be ejected that far requires force that some accident reconstruction experts have argued are inconsistent with a simple impact. The car was almost completely consumed by fire. The fuel tank ignited and the vehicle burned so intensely that Michael Hastings' body was charred beyond visual recognition. Identification was later made through dental records or fingerprints. Some observers, including former law enforcement, have noted that modern car fires after collisions are usually more contained, and that the intensity and speed of the fire has been described as unusual. The crash was captured on video by a nearby surveillance camera. The footage shows the car's headlights moving down the street at high speeds, then a flash, then flames. This video has been analyzed extensively. Some have argued the lights appear to flare unusually before impact, suggesting possible electronic malfunction or tampering. Others have argued the footage simply shows a high-speed crash. There were no skid marks, no evidence Hastings attempted to brake, which means he drove head-on into the palm tree, knowing what was going to happen at high speed. The car appeared to accelerate into the tree, actually. Now, Richard A. Clarke is one of the most credible voices in American national security. He served as the National Coordinator for Security Infrastructure Protection and Counterterrorism under Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. He was the most senior official focused on terrorism in the U.S. government on September 11, 2001, and he famously testified before the 9/11 Commission and apologized to the families of victims. He is not a fringe or controversial figure who is claiming to have access or knowledge that he doesn't have. He is a centrist establishment national security professional with decades of experience. In an interview with the Huffington Post shortly after Hastings' death, Clarke said, quote, "There is reason to believe that intelligence agencies for major powers, including the United States, know how to remotely seize control of a car. So if there were a cyber attack on Hastings' car, and I'm not saying there was, I think whoever did it would probably get away with it." End quote. He also added, quote, "What evidence is available publicly is consistent with a car cyber attack. And the problem with that is you can't prove it." End quote. This was extraordinary, right? A former senior counterterrorism official on the record telling a major news outlet that the capability to do exactly what some people suspected had happened to Michael Hastings existed within major intelligence agencies, including America's own. And obviously, this was years before the Vault 7 documents, the Vault 7 CIA documents, were released to WikiLeaks. Now, he didn't say it had happened. He said it was technically feasible and consistent with the evidence. Now, I think you understand what I'm saying here. Not only is it possible to remotely hijack a vehicle, it has been proven possible, and leaked documents from the CIA show that they explored this kind of remote hijacking, noting it would accomplish near undetectable assassinations. So, what happened to Joshua LeBlanc? Did he die in that car and his car was remotely hijacked so that he would die in that car? Was he not in the car when it crashed? Was there somebody else in that car? Was he not alone in the car? I don't know. I would say he probably was alone in the car, right? Because if there was someone in the car with him when it crashed, they too would be in the car and burnt beyond recognition. But what's going on here? This is not normal. And even Joshua LeBlanc's family is like, this is not normal. And we suspect foul play. Let's move on to James Moffett, who, remember, tragically crashed his plane in South Carolina on April 17th, 2026, while his wife and 2 sons were inside with him. First, let's talk about the plane, the Mooney M20, a single-engine piston aircraft. It's fast, efficient, well-regarded amongst, like personal hobbyist pilots, things like that. But it also does have a reputation among pilots for being less than forgiving than the trainer aircraft most general aviation pilots learn on. It's slippery, it can be, it lands fast, and it punishes small mistakes. Now, that said, fatal Mooney accidents happen every year, and the National Transportation Safety Board investigates them routinely. So it's not unlikely that a pilot would crash in this aircraft. What's notable here isn't that a Mooney crashed. Those crashes happen. It's that it happened during what should have been an unremarkable phase of the flight. And it's also because of who was flying the plane. So the family had stopped at Union County Airport to refuel, and the crash happened on departure after refueling. Now, crashing during a landing or takeoff is statistically common for general aviation incidents, for like an inexperienced or a weekend pilot. But that was not James Moffett. Moffett was a decorated veteran pilot, aerospace engineer, and defense researcher. He'd been commissioned as an Army aviation officer in 1987 after earning his mathematics degree from Missouri Southern State University. He was in the military for 21 years. And not only that, he studied as an experimental test pilot in the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School, where he accumulated flight experience in over 32 different aircraft types. So basically, he worked as a person that tested out planes. He was a test pilot. James Moffett also earned the Master's Army Aviation Badge. This is the highest aviator skill designation for Army awards, and it requires at least 15 years of qualifying aviation service and around 2,000 hours of flight time, plus rated experience across multiple different planes, across multiple different flying conditions. James Moffett would have had to have been pretty proficient at flying many different aircrafts in many different conditions. James Moffett would be among a very small subset of pilots whose training and experience made pilot error crashes statistically less likely, especially in ordinary flying conditions. He was trained specifically to understand aircraft behavior, evaluate performance, recognize abnormal conditions, and operate under pressure. Now, some people say, well, they had fueled up and there's 4 people in there, and that Mooney aircraft has a specific weight limit. So with 4 people and, maybe their luggage, and then they added fuel, that would have made it too heavy. And then when they took off, that's why they crashed. James Moffett would have known not to do that. He would have been very well aware of the weight limit, of how much weight they had in there, of how much weight fuel would add. Okay, he would have. So there's also interest to be had in what James Moffett did after the Army. He worked as a payload and flight crew support specialist at NASA's Johnson Space Center Astronaut Office, where he participated in 14 Space Shuttle ISS construction missions. He also served as a program manager for a very long word. It's the USSOCOM MH-47G Chinook development program. And this is basically a special operations heavy lift helicopter, which is exclusively flown by one unit. And basically their mission, this unit, is to fly special operations forces into and out of places that official policy says that we didn't operate in. So they fly almost exclusively at night. That's why they're called the Night Stalkers. And their operations are among the most classified in the U.S. military. Many of their missions are never publicly acknowledged. James Moffett worked as a program manager on the Chinook development program. And listen, he would have controlled everything: the program's budget, its technical upgrades, its classified modification packages, of course, the missions it flew. He would have known all of that, right? So once again, just like we were talking about Joshua LeBlanc and what kind of top security SAP Black Ops security clearance he would have needed, so would James Moffett. And it's interesting because, once again, when I type this stuff in, the Chinook helicopter is back in the news because a week ago, it was published in Alabama.com that Boeing's software lands Army Chinook helicopter without a pilot at the controls, which means they are remotely operating it, right? They are hacking in, hijacking. I mean, not really, because it's their equipment and their computer programs, but they are remotely controlling this big ass helicopter that is only flown at night for super secret Black Ops missions that we usually don't hear about. Very interesting. James Moffett retired from the Army as a lieutenant colonel in 2008. He then founded an aerospace consulting firm called Moffett Systems Incorporated, while also serving as a principal research engineer at the University of Alabama, Huntsville's Research Center. So let's talk about ISS, or the International Space Station, which James Moffett worked on 14 projects for the ISS as a payload specialist. He worked on construction projects. He was very hands-on with the ISS. The ISS, for those of you who don't know, it's a large habitable spacecraft that orbits the Earth about 250 miles up. And this is a joint project between the United States, Russia, Europe, Japan, and Canada. And at any given time, there are 3 to 12 people aboard. There have been humans living on the International Space Station continuously since November 2nd, 2000. And this is usually a mix of NASA astronauts, Russian cosmonauts, and rotating partners from the ESA, Europe, JAXA, Japan, and CSA, Canada, depending on the mission they're working on. So since the ISS is moving at about 17,500 miles per hour, it completes an orbit around the Earth every 90 minutes. And so the crew gets to see roughly 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets a day. And crews typically stay on board for 6 months, but some missions have stretched a year or longer for longevity studies. And it's crazy, but to get people on and off, they use another spacecraft to fly up, and then they dock at the docking ports that are connected to the ISS, and then capsules pull up, they latch on, crews swap on and off. It's crazy. This sounds like Star Trek, right? But for the United States, SpaceX's Crew Dragon is our astronauts' main ride. So that's the craft that gets our U.S. people on and off the ISS. And when the astronauts are done with their time on the ISS, the Dragon splashes down in the ocean off Florida, with parachutes being deployed in the last few minutes so the astronauts can get off. And then they have to immediately be rescued and pulled from the water because they are often unable to walk since their bodies have forgotten gravity because they've been in, different gravity than the Earth for so long. Now, here's the interesting thing. And once again, you may think it's unrelated, but we are definitely and genuinely tying this back into someplace. The current ISS is set to be retired around 2030 or 2031, at which point NASA says they plan to deorbit it and guide it to crash into a remote part of the Pacific Ocean called Point Nemo, aka the spacecraft graveyard. Point Nemo has its own allure to it for multiple reasons. First of all, it is, very isolated. It's the loneliest place on Earth. It's more than 1,600 miles from the nearest land in any direction, surrounded by open ocean, deep water, and basically nothing else. And because of that isolation, it has become something almost poetic and unsettling, the place where spacecraft go to die. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we have so much to talk about today and I want to cover it all, but I think it could be at the most relevant and at the least incredibly interesting. So in 1997, an ultra-low frequency underwater sound was detected by NOAA using a network of hydrophones, underwater microphones, that were originally designed to monitor undersea volcanic activity and track Soviet submarines. That sound, now called bloop, was powerful enough to be heard by sensors that were placed more than 3,000 miles apart, and the area from which this sound was detected as coming from was Point Nemo. So according to NOAA's website, the sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, very loud, with unique characteristics, and they were very eager to discover the sound's origin because, as they said at the time, it was unlike anything they had ever heard. Now, they say that as the years passed, scientists and researchers continued to deploy hydrophones closer to Antarctica because they were, in the middle of an ongoing effort to study the sounds of seafloor volcanoes and earthquakes. And it was there in 2005, on Earth's lonely southernmost landmass, that they finally discovered the source of the bloop. Quote, "The bloop was the sound of an icequake, an iceberg cracking and breaking away from an Antarctic glacier," end quote. And this is where Point Nemo slips out of geography and into mythology, kind of, because decades before anyone was talking about spacecraft graveyards or hearing icequakes, before Point Nemo became known as the place where machines from orbit are sent to die, horror writer H.P. Lovecraft imagined a sunken city in the South Pacific called R'lyeh. And this, according to him, was the resting place of Cthulhu, an ancient cosmic entity sleeping beneath the ocean, waiting to rise. So Lovecraft gave coordinates for this sunken city in the South Pacific as 47 degrees, 9 minutes south, 120 degrees, 43 minutes west. Point Nemo sits at roughly 48 degrees, 52 minutes south, and 123 degrees, 23.6 minutes west. Not an exact match, mind you, but pretty close, right? That's pretty close, man. Close enough where you'd have to wonder how a horror writer in 1928 could have guessed so close. How did he know where Point Nemo was, right? Very weird. So in Lovecraft's story, R'lyeh is a massive sunken city in the South Pacific Ocean filled with impossible, disturbing architecture. Lovecraft describes it as a place where geometry does not behave normally, angles seem wrong, space feels warped, and the human mind struggles to process what it is seeing. And in the story, Cthulhu is not just a monster in the normal sense, not like a sea monster, like a big squid or anything. Cthulhu is more like an ancient godlike being from beyond human understanding and from beyond human time. An enormous alien thing sleeping beneath the ocean, waiting for the right conditions to rise again. And that is a huge part of Lovecraft's horror style. It wasn't just like there's a monster. It's more like, hey, the moral of this story is the universe is much older, stranger, and possibly more hostile than humans can comprehend. And if we ever truly saw what was out there, our minds might break. We might implode. Very, very interesting, especially considering the recent topics that have come up in the news and that we've talked about where people are saying, hey, yeah, there's aliens out in space, or there's aliens that are interdimensional beings, but there's also something that's not human that lives in our oceans. Point Nemo has this strange combination of elements. It's almost impossible to reach. Spacecraft are intentionally crashed there, so we don't really know what lies on the bed of the ocean floor. Some weird, never-before-heard sound comes from there, and apparently that was made by, an iceberg, like something sliding off of an iceberg in Antarctica, even though NOAA said it was a sound they had never heard before. And then a famous horror writer happened to imagine an ancient sleeping entity residing there in the 1920s. Okay, let's go back to the ISS, the International Space Station, because you might wonder, what is the motive for having something like this, the ISS in general? I mean, it's very cool, okay? It's very cool. I'm really interested in it. It's very mind-bending to think that at any given time there's humans spinning around us up in space all the time. That's very interesting. Also, it's very, very expensive, right? But what's the plot? Like, what's the moral of this story? Why are we doing this? So NASA describes the ISS as a program that brings together international crews, launches vehicle operations, engineering communications, networks, and the global scientific research community. That's important. So in plain English, it's not just a spacecraft. It is a giant international research facility orbiting Earth. The ISS gives scientists something they cannot fully recreate on Earth. They can't do this stuff at all on Earth, and that is long-term microgravity. And that matters because without normal gravity, materials, fluids, flames, crystals, cells, organs, human bodies, they behave differently. Researchers use the station to study medicine, disease, drug development, tissue chips, protein crystals, combustion materials, science, plant growth, radiation exposure, and the long-term effects of space on the human body. NASA says researchers around the world use the ISS to study complex health problems on Earth, including disease formation, drug testing, diagnostics, and human biology. They do all sorts of stuff up here, right? And one of the things they do is basically like studying metals and creating different metals, materials science. In fact, in space on the ISS, they have and can create super alloys that they just can't make on Earth because of the gravity differences. Now, another major purpose of the ISS is figuring out what happens to the human body when people live away from Earth for months at a time. And this matters, according to NASA and the government, because you cannot seriously plan missions to the moon, Mars, or deeper space unless you know whether humans can physically and mentally survive the trip. ISS is actively testing technologies and studying the human body to enable long-term habitation off of Earth. There's that, right? There's that again, the theme of living off of Earth and figuring out how to do it and spending money and time trying to figure out how to do it. That's coming back in. Now, without gravity constantly pushing on their skeletons, astronauts actually lose about 1 to 2% of their bone density per month, which is the same rate as an elderly woman with osteoporosis. But this is compressed into a few months. Also, muscles atrophy. The heart actually shrinks because it doesn't have to work as hard pumping blood against gravity, so it kind of like gets smaller. Fluids will shift upward and pull in the head and chest, which is why astronauts get puffy faces in orbit. The immune system weakens, and there's also a condition that they're really into studying right now, which is called space flight associated neuroocular syndrome. And this permanently reshapes the eyeball because of the gravity difference and causes vision problems in a majority of long-duration crew. Now, all of this is the single most important research on the ISS from NASA's perspective because, like I said, you can't send anyone to Mars for a 9-month journey each way, plus surface time if you're setting up a space station or you're setting up like places for us to live. You can't do that until you understand how to keep a body functional through that and to not cause, hopefully major irreparable damage. The second major area is materials science, right? And we've talked about this. So on Earth, when you melt two metals together, gravity pulls the heavier one down, and it's really common to get uneven alloys. You always get uneven alloys, but in microgravity, heavy and light elements stay mixed, and you can produce alloys that are literally impossible to make on the ground. More uniform, sometimes with completely different properties. Some might call it exotic material. Some might call it like alien tech, right? Because it's being created in space, not on Earth. This is the exact research area that Monica Reza was in. We talked about in part 1 of the series. Super alloys, metallic glasses, high-performance composites. The ISS has hosted dozens of these experiments funded by NASA, the Department of Defense, and private companies, and much of the output is not widely published. So if you wanted to develop an exotic alloy for a classified application, doing it in orbit is a compelling way to get a material you can't replicate anywhere else. And I would like to tell you what those alloys are or give you examples of them, or what they're used for or who's using them, but I can't because that information isn't public. The most strategically valuable outcomes of microgravity research, the exotic metals, the navigation tech, the DoD sensor testing, those are almost by definitions the ones we don't get published results from, which means any honest accounting of what the ISS has produced includes a category of answers that simply reads, we don't really know. We don't know what they're doing up there with metals and propulsion and weapons and spacecraft and all sorts of things. We don't know. But protein crystallization is another big one. And honestly, that's where the money is. That's where the real money is in the private sector. So in microgravity, proteins can grow into much larger, more perfectly ordered crystals than anything achievable on Earth, which is so cool. And pharmaceutical companies actually use these crystals to map the exact 3D structure of drug targets, which dramatically accelerates drug design. In fact, Merck has used ISS-grown crystals for Keytruda, which is apparently their blockbuster cancer therapy. This has quietly become a commercial industry. A company called Varda Space Industries is now manufacturing pharmaceutical compounds in orbit and returning them to Earth in small re-entry capsules. Drug manufacturing in space is a business. NASA actually calls it, along with other things, the low Earth orbit economy. And I need you to understand that this means NASA is developing this region and wants to develop the region just above Earth, especially the orbital zone where the ISS operates, to become an active economy, to become a place where goods, services, research, manufacturing, transportation, tourism, and infrastructure are provided by commercial companies, right? Not NASA, not the government, commercial companies. And this might sound weird to you. I mean, it sounds weird to me, but it's on NASA's website. You can look it up. NASA's Commercial Low Earth Orbit Development Program says its goal is to help create commercially owned and operated destinations where NASA and other customers can purchase services. So, according to NASA, the International Space Shuttle, it's aging, and NASA doesn't want to replace it with another fully government-owned station because it's expensive. So instead, the plan is to transition to commercially owned and operated low Earth orbit destinations, basically multiple private space stations or orbital platforms where NASA can buy space, buy time, buy crew access, and then using the space and the time and the access that they're renting out, they can then research their stuff, right? So NASA will become a renter, not the landlord of space. NASA says that maintaining the International Space Station is expensive. So if NASA can buy low Earth orbit services from companies rather than owning and operating the whole station, the agency can shift more attention and more funding towards Artemis, the moon, Mars preparation, deep space habitats, and exploration beyond Earth's orbit. Late stage capitalism, am I right? Am I right? Who stands to benefit the most from this low Earth orbit economy after they've thoroughly dominated and destroyed the economy on Earth? It's not us. It's SpaceX, aka Elon Musk, Blue Origin, aka Jeff Bezos, Starlab Space, whose major shareholders are Voyager Space and Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. Major shareholders include the Vanguard Group, BlackRock, and State Street, who we all know are basically the same entity. If you map the actual flow of money in the commercial lower Earth orbit economy, you will find that almost every significant company was, one, either founded by, staffed by, or grown through alumni and personnel of NASA or other government space agencies. Two, receives substantial direct government funding for development of its commercial systems. It is structured around providing services back to the government as like an anchor customer. And three, has overlapping leadership, board members, and investors with the established defense contracting community. And four, it operates in a regulatory environment shaped largely by agencies that are also their customers. So this is complicated, but what does it mean? It means that this is not a free market emerging in lower Earth orbit. It is the aerospace and defense contracting ecosystem extending into a new domain, with a layer of commercial branding applied to legitimize the public funding and reframe the relationships. So I want to make this clear how important this is. There's an economist at University College London, and her name is Mariana Mazzucato, and she spent her career studying something most of us were never taught in school. She calls it the entrepreneurial state. The basic idea is this. When you look at almost every piece of technology that you use right now, that runs your life right now, the story you've been told about where it came from is not really accurate. We've been told that brilliant entrepreneurs in garages and Silicon Valley boardrooms invented the modern world. Steve Jobs and the iPhone, Bill Gates and the personal computer, Elon Musk and electric cars, the genius capitalist innovator changing the world. But if you actually trace the technology back to where it came from, the real foundational work, the part where the science was figured out from scratch, almost all of it was paid for by you, by me, by taxpayers, by the government. If you don't believe me, let me give you some examples. The internet, originally developed by the U.S. Department of Defense in the 1960s as a project called ARPANET, a project that was funded with public money, using public scientists and public research. GPS, okay, that's something we all use every day, right? On our phones, whatever, built by the U.S. military, funded by your taxes, still operated by the Air Force. Every time you use Google Maps, you're using a system the public paid to build. The touch screen on your phone, tablet, whatever, the underlying technology for that came out of research funded by the CIA and the National Science Foundation. Siri? Shh, don't say it too loud. That started as a DARPA project. That's the Pentagon's research arm, public money. The algorithm that made Google a $1 trillion company, the two founders developed it as graduate students at Stanford on a grant from the National Science Foundation. Public money funded the research that became the most valuable search engine on Earth. The mRNA technology behind the COVID vaccine, decades of foundational research funded by the National Institutes of Health. Public money. Almost every major prescription drug in your medicine cabinet, the basic science was done in university labs funded by NIH grants. Public money paid for the discovery of these things. Private companies took it from there. Do you see the pattern? The hard part, the risky part, the part where you spend 20 or 30 years and billions of dollars not knowing if it'll work. That part gets paid for by us, by the public, through our taxes, through the government funding of agencies like NASA, DARPA, the NIH, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Energy, the Department of Defense. And then once the science is figured out, once the risk is gone, once it's clear there's money to be made and that it'll work, that's when the private companies show up. They take the publicly funded technology, they package it, they brand it, they throw an Apple on it, they patent it, and they sell it back to us for enormous profits. We pay for it twice. We pay once to invent it and then once to buy it. And I mean, if you're using an iPhone, you're paying every 2 years to buy it. And then the CEOs of those companies get on stage at conferences and tell us they're geniuses, that they took the risk, that they built it, that they deserve their billions because they're the entrepreneurs who changed the world. But they didn't take the risk. Really, we did through our government, through our public institutions, through decades of patient, unglamorous, taxpayer-funded research that nobody puts on a magazine cover. And this is what Mazzucato means by the entrepreneurial state. The state, meaning the government, meaning us collectively, has been the actual entrepreneur, the risk taker, the innovator, the funder of long-shot research that nobody else would touch. And then we hand the rewards over to a small number of private companies and let them tell us a story about how they are heroes and how they've innovated our lives. Once you see this pattern, you start seeing it everywhere, and it's directly relevant to what we're talking about with the privatization of space, because it's the same exact playbook running again in real time. NASA spent decades and hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars figuring out how to live and work in orbit. Now that the hard part is done, that knowledge is being handed to private companies who are going to charge us and the world to use the very capabilities our parents and grandparents, and us in some cases, paid to develop. The pattern doesn't change, just the frontier. So that brings us back to Amy Esgridge. Remember what she said in that 2020 interview, because while I was talking about all of this, you may have already flashed back to what she said.
They have all these geniuses that are constantly trying to be like, damn, I've worked at NASA for 40 years and nothing I've ever done in my entire career has been deployed. Cancel, cancel, cancel. I need to try harder on the next one, or my career is a failure and I've wasted my entire career of being a genius. Guess what? All of those ideas got applied and optimized for the secret space program, motherfucker. You never saw the success.
So she's saying these people, these scientists, these researchers who work at NASA, they continue doing the work, coming up with studies, coming up with research, putting out their results, and then NASA and government agencies are like, nope, that didn't work. Go back to the drawing board. And this continues to keep these people working, trying to find something that's successful, trying to find something that validates their career, their passion, the thing they've been working on for years or decades. And as much as it pisses us off that our money is being used to develop all of these things that private companies sweep in and then make billions from, there are people out there, these scientists, researchers, brilliant minds doing the work of discovering these things. And like I said, sometimes work that takes years, decades, even their entire career, and then their work is being quietly transferred to the military-industrial complex. But they don't know it. They're not being told that. So if you're a federal employee and you invent something, the government owns it anyway, with no questions. Like if you work for the Department of Defense or NASA or something like that, and you come up with something, yeah, it's theirs. And that's why Dr. Ning Li couldn't talk about her work. She couldn't publish her studies. They couldn't be peer-reviewed, things like that. But there's also something called the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951, which gives the government the power to classify private inventions as secret if they consider them to be relevant to national security. So when you file a patent application within the United States Patent and Trademark Office, the application is reviewed not just by the patent examiners, but for certain technologies, they're also examined by representatives from various national security agencies, the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, NSA, and others. If any of those agencies determines that publishing your patent would harm national security, they can request that the Commissioner of Patents issue a secrecy order. And this prevents the patent from being published. It prevents the inventor from disclosing the invention to anyone not specifically authorized. It prevents the inventor from filing for patents in foreign countries, and it remains in effect indefinitely, renewable annually for as long as the government considers the secrecy necessary. Now, the inventor still technically owns the invention, but they can't profit from it commercially. They can't publish it. They can't talk about it and share it with collaborators. In practice, this can amount to the government effectively taking the invention without paying for it, without going through eminent domain proceedings, and without any public review. Some people believe that something like this happened to Nikola Tesla. So the numbers here are actually striking. As of recent years, there have been roughly 5,000 to 6,000 active secrecy orders in effect at any given time. The Federation of American Scientists has been tracking this for decades. New secrecy orders are issued every year, typically a few hundred per year. Most of these are never publicly known to anyone outside the inventor and the agency that requested the order. The categories of technology most commonly subjected to secrecy orders, well, they include cryptography, nuclear technology, advanced sensors, certain types of communications technology, weapons-related research, and most relevant to what we've been discussing, advanced propulsion concepts and energy technologies. So let's talk about gravity, the force that holds you to the Earth. It's also the force that fights every single thing humans try to do in space. Every rocket ever launched, every satellite ever placed in orbit, every probe ever sent to another planet, all of it has been a brute force fight against gravity. And we don't beat gravity, we just throw enough fuel at the problem to outrun it briefly. And that fight is enormously expensive. A Saturn V rocket, the one that took astronauts to the moon, was 85% fuel by weight. The actual spacecraft and payload were a tiny fraction at the very top. Most of what we lifted off the launch pad existed only to lift the rest of itself. That's the rocket equation, and it's brutal, and it's the single biggest reason space travel is so hard. So when scientists and engineers started asking in the 1940s and the 1950s, what if we didn't have to fight gravity? What if we could turn it down or off or even reverse it or shield against it? They weren't technically asking a science fiction question. They were asking the most practical question imaginable. Because if you could control gravity, you could break the rocket equation. And if you could break the rocket equation, you could change everything about what humans are capable of. Spaceflight becomes trivial. If you could reduce a spacecraft's effective weight even a little, the math changes completely. A trip to Mars currently takes 7 to 9 months because we can't carry enough fuel to go faster. With even modest gravity manipulation, that trip could take only weeks. And then travel to other outer planets, Jupiter's moons, Saturn's rings, Pluto. That becomes a matter of months instead of decades. Sending humans to those places then becomes feasible. Building infrastructure across the solar system becomes feasible. The solar system becomes ours in a way it currently isn't. And then they have more places to build more economies. Interstellar travel becomes imaginable. Right now, with the best propulsion technology we have or can realistically build, sending a probe to the nearest star, which is Proxima Centauri, 4.2 light years away, would take tens of thousands of years. Human civilization might not even exist by that time it arrived. With gravity manipulation, that trip becomes possible within a human lifetime. Probes to nearby stars, eventually ships. The galaxy starts to open up. And I mean, it would change things on Earth too. On Earth, every airplane is in a constant fight with gravity. Wings exist to generate enough lift to overcome the weight of the plane. Engines exist to push the plane forward fast enough so that the wings work. If you could reduce the effective weight of an aircraft, you could build vehicles that don't need wings, don't need runways, can hover silently, can change direction instantly without the constraints of aerodynamics. The kinds of vehicles people describe seeing in some UFO sightings. Sudden right-angle turns, instantaneous acceleration, silent hovering. That's exactly what you'd expect from a vehicle that had broken its dependence on conventional aerodynamics through gravity control. Not only that, but construction and infrastructure change. Every building, every bridge, every dam, every skyscraper exists in a permanent battle with gravity. The reason we can't build a tower 100 miles high is that it would collapse under its own weight. The reason we can't easily move massive objects is that gravity makes them too heavy. With even partial gravity manipulation, you could build structures of a scale humans have never built before, move materials in ways we can't currently move them, construct cities, space elevators, infrastructure on a planetary scale. You know, like the kind of societies and cities and places that you'd see in like Star Wars. Transportation on Earth would also transform. Cars, trucks, trains, ships, all of them are designed around the weight of what they can carry. Vehicles that could reduce their own effective weight or the weight of their cargo would be radically more efficient. Shipping costs collapse completely down, right? Even to fly, air travel would be so much cheaper because you're paying for the fuel. That's why when you buy a plane ticket, the prices of the plane tickets change based on how much gas costs at that time or oil or whatever. Travel times would be so much shorter. The geography of where people live and work could change because moving people and things would no longer be the bottleneck that it currently is. We do need to think about how that would also affect the fossil fuel industry. And when I say affect, I mean collapse, because that industry would lose its reason to exist. The transportation sector alone accounts for roughly a quarter of all fossil fuel consumption globally. Aviation, shipping, trucking, and personal vehicles are the backbone of the oil business, a technology that makes those activities radically less energy intensive or, in extreme scenarios, virtually free. Doesn't just reduce demand, it crushes the entire industry's market. That same logic applies in slightly different ways to electric utilities, to industrial gas suppliers, to mining and mineral companies that benefit from the energy-intensive nature of their operations, and to a long list of other established industries that have built their economic position around the assumption that moving mass through space requires significant energy expenditure. There is a long history of these incumbent industries actively suppressing or slowing technologies that would disrupt their business model. And this isn't a conspiracy theory, it's documented economic history. The fossil fuel industry specifically has spent decades funding climate denial research, lobbying against renewable energy incentives, and quietly purchasing and shelving patents on technologies that would have reduced demand for their products. Internal Exxon documents from the late 70s and early 80s, which became public in the 2010s, show that the company's own scientists understood climate change as a real and serious threat, and that the company chose to fund public denial campaigns rather than respond to that threat. This is established. The company has lost lawsuits and settlements over it. The electrical utility industry similarly has a documented history of fighting distributed solar, fighting battery storage, fighting electric vehicle adoption, and lobbying against any regulatory framework that would erode the centralized utility model. So if anybody's gas and electric bills have been shooting through the roof lately, like mine have, well, there's a reason why. Fossil fuels are non-renewable resources. Understand, that means that one day we will run out of them. We won't be able to use them anymore. And the people and the corporations and enterprises that benefit the most from fossil fuels and our current way of producing energy, they are going to ride it until the wheels fall off. But that's a conversation for another day, or maybe it isn't. We'll see. So anti-gravity research will be scoffed at. It's seen and referred to as fringe science, and we're constantly reminded that no one has ever been able to achieve it, to achieve gravity modification. But anti-gravity was a major study during the 1950s through the 1970s. Every major American aerospace company had some kind of gravity research program in the mid to late 1950s. Lockheed Martin, Convair, Bell Aircraft, Lear, Sperry Rand, Douglas Lockheed, and others. So Glenn Martin said publicly that gravity control was, quote, as important as the atomic bomb, end quote. And Lawrence Bell of Bell Aircraft, he openly told reporters he thought anti-gravity aircraft were coming. Now here's the key context. Once again, if you could control gravity, if you could modify it, even in a little tiny way, it would change everything. You could build an aircraft that didn't need wings or conventional lift, spacecraft that don't need enormous fuel tanks, weapons that couldn't be intercepted, vehicles that could hover silently. And during the Cold War, like everything else, it was a race to see who could be the first to have this overwhelming strategic advantage. The Air Force's Wright Air Development Center, that brings us back to General McCaslin, they funded some of this work. The Office of Naval Research supported gravity-related theoretical physics. Project Winter Haven, which was Thomas Townsend Brown's proposed March 3rd anti-gravity flying disc program, that was pitched to the Pentagon in 1952. Now, they didn't fund it, but they took the meeting, they listened. And then the space race happened. So then we were worried Russia would be the first into space. We started pouring money into rockets and less attention and money into anti-gravity research. But the research didn't actually stop. It just moved into more speculative, quiet corners. NASA's Breakthrough Propulsion Physics program ran from 1996 to 2002, and it was a small, yes, but real NASA effort led by Mark Millis at Glenn Research Center. It had a budget of about $1.6 million total over its lifetime, which isn't huge, but it did explicitly look at things like warp drives, wormholes, and field propulsion. Then we have DARPA and the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, the same people that came up with DART. And then we have DARPA and the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, which we've already talked about, which is a program that became famous around 2017 when it turned out the Pentagon had quietly been spending $22 million between 2008 and 2012 studying UFOs and exotic physics under Senator Harry Reid's sponsorship. A lot of the research was done by contractor Bigelow Aerospace, and the Defense Intelligence reference documents produced for this program included papers on warp drives, invisibility cloaking, anti-gravity, wormholes, and metamaterials. And then we have NASA's anomalous gravity work done at Marshall's Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Pay attention. I'm about to tie a lot of things back together here. And remember, when we talk about anti-gravity research, we're not talking about achieving zero gravity. We're not even talking about dramatic changes in gravity. We are talking about studying the concept that gravity could be manipulated, even in the smallest or slightest way. Eugene Podklanov is a Russian materials scientist who was working at the Tampere University of Technology in Finland in the early 1990s. And you might remember Eugene's name because I've mentioned him once before in this video. He was a colleague and friend of Dr. Ning Li, who, as we know, worked on anti-gravity research for NASA. Podklanov claimed that he had found a way to make gravity slightly weaker above a special superconducting disk. He claimed that when a superconducting ceramic disk was made extremely cold, magnetically levitated, and spun at high speed, objects placed above it lost a tiny amount of weight, as if the disk was partially blocking or shielding gravity. Now, gravity's not supposed to work that way. It appears to pass through everything. There's no known material on Earth that blocks gravity. So if Podklanov's claim had been true, it would have been revolutionary. It would mean there was some unknown interaction between magnetism and superconductivity, rotation, and gravity. And he pursued this systematically over the next several years and published his first major paper on the effect in 1992 in the journal Physica C, with a more substantial follow-up in 1996 that drew widespread attention. So that 1996 paper claimed that objects placed above a rotating superconducting disk lost roughly 0.3% to 2% of their weight. Small numbers, yes, but once again, if real, revolutionary. And it actually caught the attention of NASA and a team at Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville that included Dr. Ning Li. And this team attempted to replicate Podklanov's findings, and allegedly they were unsuccessful. Allegedly, although we wouldn't know because they don't publish anything, right? They just said they're unsuccessful. Now, around that same time that Eugene Podklanov was making his discoveries, two British researchers were making their own. N. Vivian Pope and Anthony Osborne developed their angular momentum synthesis theory around the 1990s and 2000s. So Newton said that gravity is very simple. Heavy things pull on each other, and that pull only depends on their mass and how far apart they are. So whether something is spinning or not, it shouldn't matter. A spinning top weighs the same as a non-spinning top. But Pope and Osborne came along and said, wait a minute, what if spin does matter? What if a spinning object in motion feels gravity a tiny bit differently than a non-spinning one? And if they were right, that would be a huge deal. It could potentially lead to a new kind of propulsion. So a private company called Quantum Machines really wanted to know if this theory was true and replicable because they thought it could lead to a revolutionary space engine. So they paid NASA to check it out. NASA's job was basically design an experiment. Does this work or not? And the results of this experiment were published in a November 2021 paper done at Marshall Space Center in Huntsville, Alabama, which explored the theory about gravity being related to nucleon spin. That paper has three names on it. The first is R.H. Esgridge, Richard Esgridge, Amy Esgridge's father. See, Richard Esgridge didn't just work for NASA. He was the chief engineer of the Marshall Flight Space Center's combustion physics lab for many years. He then joined the Propulsion Research and Development Center in 2002 as chief engineer for fusion propulsion experimentation, where he did a lot of things, including researching the anomalous gravitational effects of electrically pulsed superconductors. In 2012, Esgridge became the lead technical advisor for the Marshall Space Flight Center's Propulsion Research and Development Center before retiring in 2016 after 33 years with NASA. And this was 2 years after Quantum Machines approached NASA and asked them to test out the Pope-Osborne theory, which Richard Esgridge was a part of. So let's talk about what Esgridge and his colleagues found. First, they did the math, and apparently the original Pope-Osborne theory was kind of messy, so NASA's scientists, which included Richard Esgridge, rewrote it in a cleaner way. Their version said, when something spinning is also moving in a circle, a tiny extra push or pull should appear. They called it the spin-coupled force. Then they tried to actually measure this mystery force with two kinds of experiments. Experiment 1 didn't work, but experiment 2, well, that was a different story. So they took a disc of bismuth, which is kind of metal, and that disc weighed about 211 grams, roughly the weight of a deck of cards. They spun it really fast inside a magnet. They put the whole thing on a really, really precise scale. And when they spun it one way, the scale read about 0.3 grams heavier. When they spun it the other way, the scale read about 0.3 grams lighter. Once again, that is a tiny difference, about 0.1%. But according to regular physics, it shouldn't have been able to happen at all. So the 2021 NASA memorandum, which by the way, the original link I found to it was broken. So it was like on NASA's website, but then you clicked on it and it said link broken. So I had to go to the Wayback Machine. But that 2021 memorandum reported that the bismuth rotor experiment, the bismuth disc, the one with the 0.3 gram weight change, was internally repeated multiple times by that same NASA team. The authors say, quote, these results would be repeated many times with the V3 device that they built. So within the walls of that lab, with that team, with that equipment, they saw the effect more than once. But here's the strange thing they reported. Each time they ran the experiment, the effect got smaller, and after several tests, the effect disappeared entirely. But then when they built a fresh device with new magnets, the effect came back at full strength. Then it faded again. That fading and returning pattern was suspicious because real laws of physics don't get tired. So when a measured effect gets weaker, the more you measure it, that's usually a hint that something kind of boring is going on. The magnets are degrading, the equipment is heating up, the materials are changing in some way, rather than a real new force. Now, the authors noted this themselves, and they said that they suspected it had something to do with the rare earth magnets, but they also said they couldn't fully explain it. So the NASA scientists said that they repeatedly did this experiment with the same result in their own lab, but they also said that it kept fading mysteriously. The results were never independently reproduced by other researchers at other institutions. So that's important because usually you'll say, well, we did it at NASA and we did it with this equipment, but no other, team of researchers or no other institution was able to replicate it. It's not that no one was able to replicate it, it's that nobody seems to have tried. Now, the study was published as a NASA technical memorandum, not a peer-reviewed paper in a scientific journal, which means it didn't go through the standard scientific scrutiny process. But this is interesting because, once again, let's tie this all together. Anomalous gravity research, the search for a way to modify, reduce, shield, or harness gravity, has been quietly funded, studied, and pursued in the United States for roughly 70 years. It has lived in a strange institutional space, officially fringe, ridiculed in mainstream physics, but persistently funded by serious people, including NASA, DARPA, the Air Force, the Office of Naval Research, and major aerospace contractors. Because obviously, once again, the private sector, they would like that technology because they're going to create an economy in the lower orbit of Earth. So they've got to really get on that. So it's never been a single program, anti-gravity research. It's been a constellation of programs, some public, some classified, some private, some abandoned and restarted, that are woven through the larger advanced propulsion ecosystem. The reason it has persisted is simple. If it ever worked, even a little bit, it would change the game. It would unlock everything. Faster spaceflight, most importantly for NASA and our government right now, silent aircraft, which would be important to the military, cheap orbital access, asteroid defense, energy efficiency at a planetary scale. Strategic dominance over any country that didn't have it, by the way, which we love. The expected value of investing in this research, even with low odds of success, is so enormous that no serious power can afford to ignore it. And the place in the United States where this work has been most consistently pursued across multiple decades, multiple programs, and multiple research approaches is Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Ning Li was a Chinese-American physicist who came to the University of Alabama in Huntsville in the 80s and became one of the world's foremost researchers on the theoretical possibility of generating a gravity-modifying field through superconductors and rotating ions. There we have the rotating thing, right? The spinning thing. In 1991 and 1992, working with her colleague Douglas Torr, she published papers in Physical Review B, a serious peer-reviewed mainstream physics journal. proposing that a magnetic field applied to a superconductor could align the spins of ions in the material and produce what she called gravitomagnetic and gravitoelectric effects. In other words, she argued that under the right conditions, a superconductor could generate a force that interacts with gravity itself. Her work was theoretical, but it was rigorous, and it provided one of the first serious mainstream physics frameworks for the kind of effects that Eugene Podkletov was reporting experimentally around the same time. NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center took her work seriously. She collaborated with the agency through the 1990s. She was, by reputation, everybody who knew her, brilliant, careful, not a crazy person, not, talking about aliens and time travel, but a brilliant scientist, unafraid of pursuing ideas mainstream physics had largely abandoned. Then around 1999, she abruptly left the University of Alabama in Huntsville. She founded a private company called AC Gravity LLC in Huntsville, reportedly received Department of Defense funding, and effectively disappeared from the public scientific record. There are no major publications from her after the late 1990s. There are no clear public records of where she went or what she did. It's almost as if what she was doing at the University of Alabama and her anti-gravity research caught the attention of NASA and the government, and they said, you work for us now, so that anything you discover or anything you have discovered is going to be ours, and we can keep it private, and you can't talk about it publicly. And then she kind of just dropped off the map and then randomly got hit by a car, which ended her career and eventually her life. And that alone is striking. A leading theoretical physicist working on the most strategically important fringe research of the 20th century, who received Department of Defense funding, who was at the center of the Huntsville anti-gravity ecosystem, who simply just vanishes from the public record and nobody can find her. And then one day her son's like, oh yeah, she got hit by a car and then she had permanent brain damage. And I took care of her, and then she died quietly. And then NASA and the University of Alabama in Huntsville never gave her any kind of shout out when she died, even though she was so important to those institutions. Now, Dr. Ning Li's institute, the one she founded after she left the university and before she went to work for the government, her website for that institute was the one Amy Esgridge later referenced when discussing the research she was building on Amy Esgridge, because Amy Esgridge was doing some anti-gravity research as well when she died of a self-inflicted bullet wound to her head. Now, Amy's father, Richard Esgridge, spent 33 years at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, retiring in 2016. His career trajectory is, in its own, a quiet way, a map of where the anti-gravity research went after Dr. Ning Li kind of dropped off the map. He worked on advanced propulsion. He worked on plasma propulsion. He worked, in his own official biography's words, on anomalous gravitational effects of electrically pulsed superconductors, which is essentially the experimental side of the theoretical work that Dr. Ning Li was doing. He was at Marshall during the years that NASA was attempting to replicate Eugene Podkletov's work. He would have known the people involved. He would have read the internal reports. He was lead technical advisor for the Marshall Propulsion Research and Development Center from 2012 onward, which means he sat at the strategic decision-making level of NASA's most exotic propulsion research. And he was the one who, in 2015, took on the Pope-Osborne study, ran the experiments, derived the spin-coupled force equation, and saw the bismuth rotor produce its small but consistent weight change. He authored the 2021 NASA Technical Memorandum documenting the work. He is, in other words, one of the few people alive who has personally, hands-on conducted experiments in a NASA lab that produced anomalous gravity results. Small results, contested results, results that faded and reappeared mysteriously, but results that the official report described as consistent with the predictions of a spin-coupled force based on the alignment of nucleons. He's also Amy Esgridge's father. Amy Esgridge grew up inside this ecosystem. Her father was at Marshall, the institutions, the people, the research programs, the quiet history of anti-gravity work in Huntsville. All of it was the air she breathed from childhood. She got a double major in chemistry and biology at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, went on to become an interdisciplinary scientist with understanding of electrical engineering, chemistry, physics, genetic engineering. She was, by every account, by the people who knew her, brilliant, intense, complicated possibly, but unafraid. And she didn't just inherit the field, she decided to make it public. She co-founded the Institute of Exotic Sciences with her father, explicitly, as in her own words, a public-facing persona to disclose anti-gravity technology. And she referenced Dr. Ning Li's work directly on the Institute's website. She gave interviews, including a 2020 interview with Jeremy Rees, in which she said she intended to present new foundational research on anti-gravity but required NASA authorization first. She said she was working towards disclosure. She said in that same interview, if you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. She also told friends she was being threatened. She told a former British intelligence officer named Frank Milburn in a text message, which was about a month or a few weeks before her death, that if anyone reported she'd killed herself, killed someone else, or overdosed, none of it was true. And Milburn actually spoke with her 2 hours or a few hours before her death, and he said she seemed completely normal. And then on June 11th, 2022, she was found dead of a single gunshot wound to the head. Madison County coroner ruled it a suicide. Local police closed the case without further investigation. And apparently, Amy's father, Richard Esgridge, who worked at NASA for over 30 years, has spoken out and said, I don't really want to talk about this. Scientists die just like everyone else. That's all he'll say. But once again, when we have a family member who is the public spokesperson for a person involved in this web, and they're like, there's nothing to see here, is that really the case? Because we've talked about a person on this list whose family was not involved with the government or NASA in any way, and they're like, yeah, this is suspicious as hell, man. This is not what happened. It's not what it looks like. Now, Representative Eric Burleson of Missouri has since suggested that Amy may have been suffering from Havana syndrome, which is the cluster of neurological symptoms that have been associated in classified intelligence assessments with directed energy attacks against U.S. personnel by foreign adversaries. So that might sound, once again, that might sound crazy, like Havana syndrome. Amy Esgridge, and we're going to talk more about this in the next installment, Amy Esgridge was claiming that she was the victim of targeted energy attacks. She showed how her hands were burned. She also talked to people and let them know who was talking to her, who was threatening her, the kinds of things that were happening to her, break-ins at her home, all sorts of weird things that were going on. She talked to people about this stuff. She told them about this stuff. And she describes it very clearly and says she understands why they're doing it. And Havana syndrome has since been a proven thing, by the way. So this isn't something that's kind of, once again, in the conspiracy theory avenue, and we'll talk about it deeper in the next installment, but it has been proven, and this is already kind of out there. It's understanding that it happens, that directed energy attacks happen on people and have happened to people.
Sources tell CBS News the U.S. quietly purchased a device in late 2024 that may be connected to the mysterious condition known as Havana syndrome. We're told the U.S. government is now testing that portable backpack-sized device that emits pulsed radio frequency energy.
So let's go back to Joshua LeBlanc's role in the story, because it's different. He was not, as far as the public record shows, working on anti-gravity, although he could have been. He was working on the official, well-funded, publicly acknowledged future of NASA propulsion, nuclear thermal and nuclear electrical systems. But as an aerospace technologies electrical engineer at Marshall, he was a team lead on space nuclear propulsion instrumentation and control maturation. He led work on Draco, the joint NASA-DARPA nuclear thermal rocket demonstrator. He was 29 years old, which is very young to be where he was at. So he had to have been brilliant. And he was rising quickly in one of the most strategically important aerospace programs the United States government runs. Why he matters in this picture is not because we have evidence that he was working on anti-gravity. It's because of where he was working and what surrounded that work. Marshall is one institution. The Propulsion Research Division at Marshall houses both the conventional, cutting edge, and the speculative fringe. The same hallways, the same coffee machines, the same security clearances flowing across program lines. An electrical engineer at the team lead level on nuclear propulsion would, over time, know engineers and scientists working on every other propulsion concept at the center, including the anomalous gravity ones. He probably would have known Richard Esgridge or known of him. He would have known the Pulp Osborne study existed. He would have known what Dr. Ning Li's name meant to that building and its history. his clearance levels would have been substantial. Once again, top secret minimum. Q clearance for the nuclear work, almost certainly SAP read-ins for Draco. He was a person with formal access to America's nuclear propulsion future and informal proximity to the rest of the propulsion research ecosystem. And he left his home before dawn one July morning in 2025 with no phone, no wallet, no reason. His Tesla sat at the Huntsville airport for 4 hours, then drove west on rural back roads, and by afternoon, the car was a burnt wreck. His body was unrecognizable. The official ruling was a single vehicle accident. James Moffett, the pilot, he's the newest thread, and at first glance, he might seem like a different category of person. He wasn't a propulsion scientist. He wasn't an anti-gravity researcher. He was a master Army aviator and an aerospace engineer, a former program manager for one of the most secretive aviation units in the U.S. military, which is the Night Stalkers. But look at what his career actually consisted of. He was an experimental test pilot at the Naval Test Pilot School. He flew 32 different airframes. He worked at NASA Johnson on 14 ISS construction missions. He ran the Night Stalkers, who fly the most classified missions in the U.S. military. And after retiring as a lieutenant colonel, he founded a defense aviation consulting firm working on the Army's Degraded Visual Environment Mitigation Program and Next Generation Unmanned Aircraft Systems Demonstrator. And remember, unmanned systems, right? We just have this news coming a week ago that they figured out how to fly this massive Night Stalker helicopter without a pilot. And then he ended up as a principal research engineer at the University of Alabama in Huntsville's Research and Engineering Support Center. So when I say James Moffett worked on 14 Space Shuttle ISS construction missions as a payload and flight crew support specialist, we're not talking about a marketing role. We're not talking about someone who was kind of just like there and, maybe put some stuff together and nailed some things in. We're talking about someone who was directly involved in planning, integrating, and supporting the actual hardware that went to build the station. Payload specialists work with the experiments, the modules, the equipment, and crucially, the research racks that get installed in the station and used by every subsequent crew. He didn't just see ISS construction happen. He helped make decisions about what went up, what got installed, what experiments got priority, and how the research infrastructure of that station got built. He had visibility into the entire research portfolio of the station, not just the headline experiments that we see, the stuff that we don't see, the stuff that the government's doing up there, the Department of Defense, with the metals and, whatever else, the weapons and the crafts that we don't see because they're top secret, and he would have had that clearance. This is the part that connects directly to everything we've been talking about. The ISS is fundamentally a microgravity laboratory. The whole point of having it is to do research in conditions where Earth's gravity isn't the dominant variable, and among the things that get studied, there are very specifically material science under reduced gravity. This includes alloys, superalloys, metallic crystals, crystalline structures that can't be produced on Earth because gravity causes heavier components to settle out during cooling. The Materials Science Research Rack at Marshall Space Flight Center Payload Operations Integration Center has hosted dozens of these experiments, some of them publicly documented, many are not. They're funded by the Department of Defense, by classified programs, or by private contractors with proprietary protections. Behavior of spinning objects in microgravity, this is where it gets really interesting. Because remember, this kind of ties into Podklanov's theories. It ties into Pope and Osborne. It ties into what Dr. Ning Lee was doing at NASA and what Amy Esgridge's father, Richard, was doing at NASA. Many ISS experiments have specifically studied how rotating objects, gyroscopes, and spinning fluids behave in the absence of gravity's dominant pull. The Spin Lab and various fluid physics experiments have produced data that in principle could feed directly into the kind of research Pope, Osborne, Podklanov, and Ning Lee were doing. If you're trying to understand whether spin and gravity have an unconventional interaction, doing the experiment in microgravity is one of the cleanest and best ways to isolate the variables. Superconductor experiments. This was big in what Ning Lee was doing and what Podklanov was doing. The ISS has hosted experiments on superconducting materials at low temperatures, and you'll recall that Dr. Ning Lee's theoretical framework and Podklanov's experimental claims both centered on rotating superconductors. Doing these experiments in actual microgravity, away from Earth's gravity field, is technically the kind of test that could potentially distinguish a real anomalous effect from a measurement artifact or like some unrelated thing like, rare metals or whatever. And here's where the threads weave together. The work that Pope Osborne, Dr. Ning Li, Polkanov, and Richard Esgridge were doing all separately and across decades was fundamentally about the behavior of spinning objects, aligning atomic nuclei and gravity. All of it was experimental work conducted in Earth's gravity field, where the dominant gravitational pull made measuring small anomalies extraordinarily difficult. The ISS represents the only environment in which humans have ever been able to conduct that kind of research without Earth's gravity overwhelming the measurement. So if any of the theoretical predictions of those researchers were valid, if spin really does interact with gravity in unconventional ways, then the most rigorous tests of those theories would happen in space at ISS, and James Moffett would know about them. And then he crashed his plane on April 17th, 2026, even though he's flown for thousands of hours and he's flown 33 different types of aircraft. So what do we have? A field of research, anomalous gravity, that the U.S. government has had a strategic interest in for 70 years. A city, Huntsville, Alabama, that has been the operational center of that research for most of that time. An institution, NASA Marshall Space Flight Center, that has hosted both the public and private threads of that work. A research center, University of Alabama at Huntsville's Research and Engineering Support Center, that has been the academic industrial partner threading the strands together. What could the people in this pattern have collectively known? They could have known whether the foundational and theoretical claims of Dr. Ning Li and Pope Osborne were valid, and whether anyone in classified programs had achieved more real and substantial effects than the small effects in the public record. They could have known what the actual state of advanced propulsion research is in the United States, meaning the gap between what we, the public, are told and what is actually being developed in classified settings. They could have known whether anomalous airspace observations, like the ones that have surfaced in ATIP, the Pentagon UAP reports, the Navy pilot videos, we watched those in the first video in the series. They would have known if those videos were connected to American research programs. So as in, like, maybe the United States has figured out how to control gravity and they're testing these flights, these vessels, and then these Navy pilots are seeing them, and then the United States is like, what? What are those? Aliens. Or maybe these are foreign research programs or genuinely unexplained phenomena, like aliens. These people could have known that. They could have known whether anti-gravity research or, tests and research and studies into manipulating gravity, whether the official narrative of that being fringe research that's never panned out and there's nothing to see here is the truth or a cover for something further along than the public knows. Any one of them having any of that knowledge would represent a strategic risk to whatever institutional architecture wants that knowledge contained, which, once again, is everybody. If the government knows about it, they want it contained because they want to be the first to perfect it and unveil it. They don't obviously want China or Russia or anyone to get their hands on that information. That would be very important. They also don't want us to know they have it. And there's so many industries that currently run humanity, and they don't want that knowledge or the fact that you could possibly manipulate or modify gravity even in a small way. They don't want that out because that would completely destroy them. And the government and those industries could be in bed together where the government's like, yeah, we'll be over here. We'll be funding it with taxpayer money and we'll be developing it and we can use it for like military stuff and keep it top secret. And we won't unveil it until basically you guys are already out of business because your fossil fuels have run out. I don't know. But all I'm saying is there's a lot of people who wouldn't want that to be known. If you take the structural arguments seriously, that gravity manipulation is the most strategically valuable technology a country could develop, and that whoever has it first wins the next century and beyond, then the people who know about it become, by definition, the most strategically sensitive people in the country. Not because they're spies, not because they've stolen documents, but because their knowledge itself is dangerous. They know whether the program is real. They know how far along it is. They know who's doing it. They know whether adversaries are doing it too. They know whether the public framework, like this is fringe science, ignore it, is a true description of reality or a managed narrative. And in a system that has both a documented historical pattern of suppressing inconvenient knowledge and the active technical capability to conduct nearly undetectable assassinations, the calculus, the math for handling a person who threatens to disclose strategic information is well established. You don't need a single villain here. You don't need a coordinated conspiracy with a smoke-filled room. You need a system in which the technology is real or believed to be real at some level of development. The information is classified or held under proprietary trade secret protection or both. The institutional actors with knowledge of it have been identified and are tracked. The legal infrastructure exists, like the Invention Secrecy Act, security clearances, NDAs, classified compartments, to prevent disclosure through normal channels. The technical capability exists to neutralize disclosures when normal channels fail. Like, we can take people out and make it look like an accident. The historical precedent exists to make those neutralizations look like accidents, suicides, or unfortunate but explicable events, understandable and explainable events. Every single one of those conditions is met at this point. We've established that across our conversations. None of it's speculation. All of it is documented in some combination of the Church Committee, the Vault 7 leaks, the Invention Secrecy Act, the ATIP files, and the institutional history of Huntsville's aerospace research. What's left is the question of whether the system has been used against the specific people in this story, right? So once again, we have established that this research is being done. Science, like it has been suppressed in the past because of whatever interests whoever has. And we know that basically people have been erased, deleted off the planet because of what they know about things. Because it's the greater good, right? Like, take out the one for the greater good, because these people have convinced themselves that keeping this all a secret so that they can benefit somehow is the greater good. So did the people we talked about today fall under that, right? Joshua LeBlanc, James Moffett, Amy Esgridge, and we have more to talk about when it comes to Amy Esgridge and the claims she made in the months and weeks leading up to her untimely death. The claims that make all of this, what we just talked about, eerily more real and possible, because she's kind of nailing exactly what we talked about today, which is that these scientists sometimes come up with things and then the government and the military absorb their work or absorb them, give them jobs. And then they're like, no, we couldn't do anything with your research. It wasn't valuable. Try harder. And these people keep trying harder, thinking that what they came up with never went anywhere, but it did. It did. It was just stolen, allegedly used for whatever applications the people they work for decided. So let me know what you think about all this. I know this is a long video and I know we talked about a lot, but let me know in the comment section what you think about all of this. And I don't know, like the video if you liked it, share it if you think it's worth sharing, subscribe if you want to hear more information about this. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. I'll see you very, very soon.